Hello Group 4. This is the quick video about your reading for this week. It's week 14 context reading, talking about bilingualism, talking about your group's topic is specifically learning foreign languages. So I will just take you through this reading, help you understand it a little bit. So your first paragraph here is interesting. In many contexts, schools and policymakers do not aim for bilingual competence or for language immersion, but instead they offer opportunities for children to experience a new language in a limited way. For those children who are born in monolingual families and stay in the same monolingual language environment for at least the first 10 years of their lives, the first encounter they have with another language will happen in primary school, usually. Typically, due to the unprecedented popularity of English as a language of international communication, more and more countries choose English. That's no surprise, right? As the first foreign language at school, children start a foreign language at the age of 8 to 9 in such schools, but sometimes even earlier at the age of 6 to 7. In Korea, we know they can start English study even earlier than that sometimes if their parents want to put them in a special hagwon or English kindergarten, right? In some countries, it's not uncommon to provide formal English language programs for children as young as 3 years of age. Many private schools in Japan, Thailand, and Taiwan do that. When this is introduced in primary school, often only a small number of teaching hours are devoted to it. It's a weekly timetable thing, right? It's not totally immersion. You could call that a low input level context. Low input. It's just a couple hours a week, right? By contrast, in higher input level contexts, children learn a second language integrated into the curriculum rather than as a separate subject. You have seen this already. Okay, this is sometimes called CBI or content-based instruction, sometimes called CLIL, which is very related to CBI, content language integrated learning. Integrated in the curriculum rather than a separate subject. As a consequence of the integration, they may be exposed to the target language for longer periods of time during the week. Table 5 will show you this. We'll get to that in a second. Differences between foreign and second language contexts. But I'm glad that they point out here that this isn't exactly 100% accurate here because the differences are not always clear-cut due to the availability of the internet. You know, in Korea, yeah, you have opportunities to talk to native speakers. Go to Itaewon, go to Haebangchon, whatever, the classic examples. Go to Pyeongtaek, right? Giant American base out there. But even without that, there is the internet. Right? This is kind of a framework that was designed before the internet, where it's like, okay, do you have access to people who use the language or not? Do you have access to resources about the language or not? Well, in the year 2021, we all have the internet, and if you're from a rich country like Korea, you probably have easy access to English materials too. And that's all without even considering the local population of people like me or international people who are here who use English for everything, right? So if we look at the two little boxes here, foreign language, low level of input, 1 to 3 hours a week, timetable lessons, restricted opportunities outside of class to use the target language, but again, if that foreign language context is Korea, they're just doing a Hagwon for a couple hours a week, you could give them homework where they use the internet, right? Where they seek out, you could give them opportunities to use digital resources like Duolingo or language exchange, depending on their age. The focus is on language as a formal system, language as a subject. So the language itself is what they're studying, right? Think of it as Krashen's learning rather than acquisition. Second language context, this is when I was teaching ESL in America, right? You're giving it to the people who need to use English for life in America, right? It's higher level input, more than just a timetable lesson. Sometimes our students were coming to us for intensive English so they could get into that university in America and succeed. They call those IEPs, intensive English program. Regular opportunities to use the target language outside class. That is an advantage. Korea, still, I feel like it's something in the middle, especially if you're over there in Yongsan-gu by school, right? I would love to send some Korean kids out to Itaewon, interview a foreigner without being annoying, and take some pictures of English science, right? Something like that, something simple. They have access to it. Focuses on content and language integrated across the curriculum. In that ESL context, where we tend to have a balance, right? We're interested in improving their English, but we're also teaching them something. So there's an enormous variety of primary level modern foreign language programs around the world. In primary and pre-primary sectors, foreign language learning is considered preparatory for more serious secondary level study, and therefore there's less emphasis on linguistic and proficiency outcomes. Typically, the aims of such foreign language programs are a combination of the following. Basic communication abilities, right? You want them to develop those. Fostering motivation by making initial language learning experiences fun. It could be motivating, as I read in so many TPR justifications. You guys appreciate that. Encouraging early familiarization with a new culture, developing cognitive, metacognitive, meta-linguistic skills through an initial contact with a foreign language system. So these are some of the goals of primary level foreign language instruction programs. If you like, we can review what these things mean. So cognitive skills, general thinking skills, developing that through the foreign language. Developing metacognitive skills, thinking about thinking, right? Perhaps exploring your own study habits as a learner, right? Metacognitive skills. And meta-linguistic skills. You know, meta-linguistic refers to kind of language about language, knowledge of language. So what is a noun, what is a verb, what's the word order of English, being aware of what language is and what language does, as opposed to just knowing the language itself and how to use it. 4 main types of programs that are out there. You've got the once a week with flexibility, the language awareness model, and this is interesting. You might want to think about this one a little bit, and bilingual or partial immersion. So I would explain what those are, but I think our little quote box here by Ed de Lembos, Johnstone, and Kubanek 2006 does a better job than I could. So on the 4 models of language teaching, number 1 is roughly 1 hour a week for teaching whatever language it is. English, Spanish, Japanese, mainly based on a given course book and other material. 2 is the same as 1, but there's a little more flexibility. You could connect that language to some of the other curriculum, connect it to their history, connected to math, connected to science, geography. Number 3, this one's pretty cool, all right? A language awareness model. Now, one of the ways to define that is it's not just one additional language, but giving access to a number of languages and cultures in order to develop underlying qualities such as meta-linguistic awareness and intercultural sensitivity. I love this idea, because in certain contexts, like where I'm from at the Department of Motor Vehicles in the state of California, all the documents are written in like 30 languages. So we have people from everywhere in the world. And so if your goal for a Californian kid like me is to prepare a Californian kid like me to have high intercultural communication skills, then you want to make me really good at Spanish, or do you want to expose me to Spanish, Punjabi, Chinese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, and teach me a little bit about those cultures, help me see some basic differences and similarities between those languages, and then even at 7 or 6 years old, maybe 8 years old, you're already saying, oh yeah, I know something about each of these groups thanks to that language awareness model that the school put in place. I think that's pretty cool. In a context of immigration, I think that's really important. And who knows, Korea could become an immigration nation in the years to come. Slowly but surely, you're getting people from other parts of the world. And so maybe what Korean kids need is a little awareness of, some of the other languages that are out there, some of the other cultures that are out there, apart from, USA in English, right? Or Australia in English, or Britain in English. So, and then the fourth one is kind of bilingual or partial immersion. It has the highest level. In the end, that's where you're going to end up with the highest level of proficiency, but unlikely to be generally applicable. What does that mean? Well, it's an ideal situation if you can do it, and if it's right for your context, but you can't just do immersion everywhere, right? In some societies, that's just not going to work, right? Would it work in Korea? I don't know. Immersion schools, there's international schools, but some countries, it's not practical because you need a lot of well-trained bilingual teachers for that to work, and you need a general public that's interested. Like I said in a previous video, back home in California, every time there's a suggestion to have a sheltered bilingual program, English and Spanish, Spanish-speaking kids get to improve their English, English-speaking kids get to learn some Spanish. There's always parents, and it's the American parents, it's the English-speaking parents who are like, oh no, don't do that. I want my kid to know English and doesn't need to, this is America, or whatever the reasons are. Usually the reason is, we don't think that they're going to learn English well enough if we start putting Spanish in their brains. But according to the research, of course, it doesn't affect your native language. Certainly not significantly. And I don't see why a parent would say no. Anyway, so those are some of the models that they discuss here. The conclusion that these three made is highly desirable that ways should be found of combining the unique advantages of 2 and 3. Unique advantages of the kind of, the 2 is the hour a week, but you can combine with some curriculum, and 3 is that language awareness. That one I think is kind of special. What if that was like, maybe it's one class that students get in their, in 6th grade or something, right? And then it's like, for the rest of their school years, it's like, oh, remember when we learned about the difference between, Vietnamese and Thai people, or in Thai language? Yeah, that's kind of cool. All right. So, moving on to page 129. Oh, we're on 129, a little lower on 129. The most commonly encountered model in primary schools is encompassed in the subject teaching approach. The foreign language lesson is taught for 1 to 2 hours a week. It's a specialist subject teacher or the class teacher who covers the rest of the curriculum with the children. In some contexts, you have a language awareness model like we're talking about, but this is a little bit of a different way to do it. Inspired by the work of Hawkins, 1984, generally focuses on basic comparisons between the children's L1 and the target language. The underlying aim is to develop the children's understanding of the concept of language, rather than learning a new language per se. Young and Hilo, for example, advocate this approach for contexts where various languages are already present at school, like minority languages in the UK. That's what I was talking about earlier. In the context of California, it would be a very similar situation. Another possible approach is embedding, integrating the target language into the primary curriculum. You have meaningful activities from other curriculum areas in the language lesson. Integrating language and content is useful in that this approach embraces holistic learning. Holistic learning altogether, right? Not artificially separated. Which is consistent with the learning needs of young children. It could be minimal and ad hoc. Ad hoc is kind of like you figure it out as you go. It's not like something that you really plan. Or it can be more long-term and systematic. Different levels of embedding exist, and when such embedding is consistent, the programs are often referred to as CBI programs, content-based instruction, or theme-based programs. When they talk about theme-based programs, that's kind of cool. Like they get a lesson in L1 in biology class, and then they get the same lesson in their English class. So it's like they get reinforcement of those ideas plus the new language to talk about it. Yeah. So if we skip down to this is 130, Derek, 1977. We've tried to devise a scheme that provides a series of language items with relevance to the children's language needing activity in school and outside. In the process of language selection, we therefore start by identifying high priority activities. Items learned can be continually reinforced by real use. So that's how they decide which language items will be used. The next part gets into the Cambridge Young Learners Exam, which is a reliable and consistent measure of how well your child is doing in the 4 skills. You might be familiar. They work towards little certificates and badges and shields and things. They have 4 levels. The last part of your reading, well, before the summary, the benefits of learning foreign languages in childhood. So the answers to these questions depend on how the benefits are measured. What do we mean when we say benefits, right? So in the next paragraph, on the whole, according to John Stone, 1999, there is no clear evidence that primary school foreign language learning will necessarily lead to better attainments in secondary school. All right, I'm disappointed again. And that's the nature of research, right? Some studies have demonstrated very modest advantages for learners who started a foreign language in earlier grades than their peers who started it later. For example, if you look at this case in Slovakia, children who started earlier and had 6 years of German outperformed those who started later and had only 4 years of German. Okay, they did a little better with 6 years. In 1997, this Doye study indicated that early learners of English could become better than pupils who started later after primary school, but only if the teaching was appropriate. These are the conditions, right? Starting in primary school is better, leads to superior outcomes only if the teaching was appropriate for them. Well done teaching for those students. If the teachers were fully qualified, okay, and if there was continuity between primary and secondary provision. That's a really important part, and that's one of the things that a lot of the reading is going to mention, is that, you know, if you start students in that second language in primary school and they work hard at it and they're doing that for, 3 years, maybe 4 years, they move on to secondary school, these two schools don't necessarily talk to each other. So there's no continuity. So, when we talk about should we put a kid in English class from elementary school, okay, but make sure they're communicating with the secondary school or the kid's going to lose all that English. It's too long between English classes that they'll lose it. Independent evaluation of the Scottish pilot project confirmed a slight advantage for pupils as compared to late starters. Advantages: pronunciation, patterns of intonation, length of utterance, and use of communication strategies, complexity of structure, etc. And then another study fails to document advantages for younger learners. These authors found that older learners performed better in phonetic perception and language production regarding fluency, accuracy, and complexity. And the Barcelona project also indicated a clear advantage for older learners. So again, we're going back to older learners versus young learners and how there's no clear-cut answer. You can find research that kind of says the opposite thing. But if you measure success differently, like not linguistic outcomes, but if success means it helps children to learn about other cultures, develop positive attitudes about languages and motivation, and promotes language awareness, then many of those early language exposure classes and programs would be considered successful. Yeah, maybe they're not outperforming kids who start learning in primary school, but they do have all this awareness now of what language is, what different cultures are, and helps them develop positive attitudes about learning languages. And so little is known about the process of foreign language learning and what children can do at what stage. Here's a common experience of foreign language programs. Children are not exposed to the target language enough to learn to participate in meaningful communication. Tell me if any of this sounds familiar, guys. They may learn songs and rhymes, some basic vocabulary, and carefully rehearsed dialogues, but they rarely progress further, and typically they're unable to express their own meanings spontaneously. So, are we going to measure success by if the kid can say a memorized thing, if the kid can sing a song, or are we going to measure success by their ability to talk to people in English? And again, that lack of continuity, which I spoke about before, which means they have to start it all over again in secondary school. Now that's not fair. You want those years of English to count, right? And that's going to do terrible things to motivation levels, and indirectly sends out a negative message about the value of language learning in primary schools to both the children and their parents. So the parents will be dissatisfied with the general level of language teaching in state schools, and then they send their children to private schools to learn more English. Tell me if this sounds familiar. And children in these schools follow parallel courses that often overlap the content of the regular schools, and generally there's no communication between those school systems, etc., etc., etc. And so the next paragraph is talking about, interesting because they mention Korea, but a problem is the uneven provision of professional development for teachers. So especially if you're out in remote areas, there could be teachers who are not fully qualified, whose own foreign language is not, they don't think it's satisfactory. There's this study by Butler in 2004 surveying primary English teachers' perceptions of their own competences with regard to teaching English as a foreign language. The results indicated that the majority of those teachers in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan did not think that they were adequately prepared for teaching English in primary classrooms. And they identified the development of their own English language competence, including oral fluency and pronunciation, as the most urgent areas in need of updating and development. I'm going to help you with one more paragraph, and then I'll move into the conclusion, the summary, in this video. And that is the enormous paragraph here. In families, balanced bilingualism can only be achieved if parents invest discipline, consistency, and patience into orchestrating language practices. In preschool and school contexts where children are immersed in a second language, it is important to continue cultivating the first language so that the children can achieve effective bilingual competence and positive bilingual identities. So don't forget to support your students' L1 as well, whether that L1 is Korean or not. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump into your summary and just go over some areas of highlighted here. Basically, the effects of multilingualism. Like many other concepts in theory, there is no clear answer we can point to, but the strength of positive versus negative perceptions of the relationship has shifted over time, as it says here. This shift has been attributable as much to philosophical and political factors as to scientific findings. Multilingualism philosophically has positive effects on cognitive development. That's related to the belief that the foreign language study, Greek and Latin traditionally, was about training the mind. There's still an assumption in many parts of the world that multilingualism is an essential characteristic of educated and cultured members of society. The opposite notion, and this is the sad part, that multilingualism has a negative impact on general intelligence. Probably reached its zenith, which is the pinnacle, which is the peak. In US-based research on immigrants during the 1930s, motivated by increasingly xenophobic, that means fear of foreigners, xenophobic, isolationist, that's when you want your country to be isolated on its own without interfering in other countries, without other countries interfering in your country. Their political sentiments at that time. So you have to remember, after the First World War, the United States was very much like, we're not going to do that again, we're going to take care of ourselves. And so there's a lot of isolationist mentality. Of course, that didn't last long, because later we had World War II. But some of that expressed itself in these kind of discriminatory or even racist political ideas. And they were based on low scores of immigrants who spoke languages other than English natively on standardized tests. And those standardized tests were often written in English about like middle-class white Protestant cultural context. So of course they're going to get low scores. Yeah, so it's a sad story of multilingualism and why why people traditionally, like some people had the view that it was going to negatively affect thinking, which is absolutely wrong. There's no research to support that, but we do know that people who speak more languages, you know, that's an advantage in a lot of ways, right? So down here, if we skip down here, some things we can take home. Bilingual children show consistent advantages in tasks of both verbal and nonverbal abilities. Bilingual children show advanced meta-linguistic abilities, especially manifested in their control of language processing. So that's a meta-linguistic ability. Cognitive and meta-linguistic advantages appear in bilingual situations that involve systematic uses of the two languages, such as simultaneous acquisition settings or bilingual education. The cognitive effects of bilingualism appear relatively early in this process of becoming bilingual and do not require high levels of bilingual proficiency nor the achievement of balanced bilingualism. So whether your second language is at the same level of your first language or not, you're still going to get some cognitive advantages for you beginning that process, for going through that process of learning another language. And finally, bilingual children have advantages in the use of language for verbal mediation, as shown by their higher frequency of private speech utterances and their larger numbers of private speech functions. What's private speech, guys? Yeah, it's talking to yourself. Raise your hand if you talk to yourself. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Verbal mediation, it can be called. You're just kind of expressing yourself verbally, talking yourself through a problem or talking yourself through a situation, right? Using language to accomplish that. Well, when you're talking about children, verbal mediation is a much better skill than physical mediation in the classroom when they want to fight each other or whatever it is. Like verbal mediation is a kind of therapeutic thing. All right, so this has been your conclusion. I have been your teacher. I'm going to put up all these videos for you so you have access to them right now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.